Before he was the conqueror of empires, before his name struck terror into the hearts of Persian kings, before he wept at the edge of the known world having run out of lands to claim, Alexander was a boy standing in the shadow of a brutal father, watching his mother whisper promises of divine destiny into his ear. This is the story of how a Macedonian prince, trained by the greatest philosopher of antiquity and hardened by blood feuds in a court of assassins, became the most feared military genius the ancient world had ever seen, only to discover that conquering the world was easier than conquering himself. Journey through the dust of forgotten battlefields, walk the marble halls where kings plotted his death, and stand beside him at the edge of the earth where even gods fell silent. This is not just history. This is the hour that changes how you see ambition, power, and the terrible price of immortality. What drives a man to conquer the entire known world by the age of 30, only to sit weeping because there are no more kingdoms left to claim? What turns a boy into a legend so powerful that 2,000 years later, generals still study his tactics and philosophers still debate whether he was a hero or a monster? Alexander the Great died at 32, and in those brief, blood-soaked years, he built an empire that stretched from Greece to India, defeated armies 10 times the size of his own, and changed the course of human civilization forever. But before the glory, before the legend, there was a frightened boy in a violent kingdom, caught between a father who wanted to kill him and a mother who promised he was destined to become a god. This is his story, raw, unfiltered, and told the way it actually happened. Forget everything you think you know about Alexander. The truth is far more brutal, far more human, and far more extraordinary than any myth. Segment 1. Before the legend, life in the shadows. The year is 343 BCE, and in the mountain kingdom of Macedon, a 13-year-old boy stands in a courtyard watching his father's soldiers return from yet another campaign. The boy's name is Alexander, and he is slight for his age, with heterochromatic eyes, one blue, one brown, that mark him as different, perhaps touched by gods, perhaps cursed. The soldiers barely glance at him as they pass. Their armor is caked with dried blood and mud from the Illyrian frontier. Some limp. Others carry their wounded on improvised stretchers made from spears and cloaks. The smell hits Alexander before the men do: sweat, infection, horse dung, and something else, something metallic and sweet that he will later learn is the smell of men dying slowly from gut wounds. Macedon in the mid-4th century BCE is not the marble paradise of later Greek imagination. It is a rough, half-barbaric kingdom on the northern edge of the Hellenic world, a place where Greek culture meets Thracian ferocity and Illyrian savagery. The capital, Pella, sits on a malarial plain that floods every spring, turning the streets into rivers of sewage and mud. The palace itself, though grander than anything in the surrounding villages, is a far cry from the opulent courts of Persia or even Athens. Its walls are timber and stone, not marble. Its floors are packed earth covered with rush mats that smell of mildew. In winter, the mountain winds howl through gaps in the walls, and even the royal family huddles near braziers, wrapped in sheepskin and wool. Alexander's childhood is not one of comfort but of constant, gnawing tension. His father, Philip II, is a military genius who has transformed Macedon from a backwater into a rising power, but Philip is also a brutal man who drinks too much, takes too many wives, and makes too many enemies. The court at Pella is a snake pit of intrigue. Nobles plot against each other. Wives poison rivals. Bodyguards are bribed. Heirs are murdered in their sleep. Alexander grows up knowing that his position as heir is never secure. His mother, Olympias, reminds him constantly that Philip has other sons, other wives, other potential successors. She tells him he must be stronger, smarter, more ruthless than all of them. She tells him he is special, that on the night of his birth, the temple of Artemis at Ephesus burned to the ground, a sign from the gods that a world conqueror had been born. But divine destiny feels distant when you are a boy in a violent court. Alexander trains in the palace gymnasium under the supervision of his father's officers, hard men who have survived decades of border wars and palace coups. The training is not gentle. Macedonian boys are expected to endure pain without complaint, to fight with sword and spear until their hands bleed, to wrestle in the mud until someone submits or passes out. Alexander is small, slender, quick rather than strong, and some of the older boys mock him for it. They call him weak. They say he looks more like a girl than a warrior. On one occasion, a boy 3 years older shoves Alexander into the mud during a wrestling match and stands over him, laughing. Alexander does not cry. He waits. 3 days later, when the older boy is alone in the stables, Alexander ambushes him with a wooden practice sword, striking him repeatedly across the shins and ribs until the boy begs for mercy. The lesson is learned. Alexander may be small, but he is not weak, and he never forgets an insult. The relationship between Alexander and his father is complex and corrosive. Philip loves his son in his own rough way, but he is also jealous of him. Philip sees in Alexander a reflection of what he himself once was: hungry, ambitious, fearless, but also something more, something that Philip will never possess. Philip is a great general, but Alexander shows signs of being a genius. At 12, Alexander tames Bucephalus, a wild stallion that no one else can ride, by noticing that the horse is afraid of its own shadow and turning it to face the sun. Philip watches this and reportedly says, "My boy, you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions. Macedon is too small for you." It is meant as praise, but there is an edge to it, a warning. Philip knows that ambitious sons are dangerous. The palace itself is a place of shadows and whispers. Alexander learns to walk softly, to listen at doors, to note who speaks to whom and who avoids whom. His mother, Olympias, is a priestess of Dionysian cults, a woman of wild ecstasies and darker rituals. She keeps snakes in her chambers, claiming they are sacred to the gods. Servants whisper that she sleeps with serpents coiled around her arms. Alexander sometimes wakes at night to hear her chanting in a language he does not recognize, her voice rising and falling in rhythms that make his skin crawl. She tells him stories of Achilles, her ancestor, the greatest warrior who ever lived. She tells him that the blood of heroes runs in his veins, that he is destined to surpass even Achilles. She also warns him about his father. She says Philip is planning to set him aside, to name another son as heir. She says Alexander must be ready to fight for his throne, to kill if necessary. Is she telling the truth, or is she manipulating him? Alexander is too young to know. All he knows is that the world he inhabits is precarious, violent, and uncertain. He learns to sleep lightly, to keep a dagger under his pillow, to trust no one completely. The lessons of those early years will shape everything that follows. They will teach him that power is never given, only taken. That loyalty is earned through fear and respect. That the only security is strength. That the world belongs to those willing to seize it. Outside the palace, the kingdom groans under the weight of constant warfare. Macedon is surrounded by enemies: Illyrians to the west, Thracians to the north, Greek city-states to the south, who view Macedonians as barely civilized barbarians. Philip's strategy is simple: expand or die. He leads his army on campaign after campaign, often taking Alexander with him. The boy watches from horseback as his father's phalanx, a dense formation of spearmen with 18-foot pikes, smashes into enemy lines. He watches men die, watches the wounded scream and thrash in the mud, watches the crows descend on the dead after the battle is over. War, he learns, is not glorious. It is chaotic, ugly, and terrifying, but it is also intoxicating. There is a clarity to battle, a purity. In war, the strong survive and the weak die. In war, there is no room for doubt or hesitation. In war, a man discovers what he truly is. At 14, Philip sends Alexander to study under Aristotle, the greatest philosopher in the Greek world. For 3 years, Alexander and a small group of companions live at Mysa, a secluded sanctuary far from the blood and intrigue of the court. Here, the world is different. Aristotle teaches them logic, biology, ethics, literature. He reads them Homer's Iliad, and Alexander becomes obsessed with Achilles, memorizing entire passages, dreaming of his own glory. But Aristotle also teaches them something darker: that the world is divided into Greeks and barbarians, that the Greeks are naturally superior, destined to rule. This idea plants a seed in Alexander's mind. If the Greeks are destined to rule, and if he is the greatest of the Greeks, then is he not destined to rule the world? But destiny is still distant. For now, he is still a boy in the shadows, watching, learning, waiting. The soldiers return from another campaign. His father drinks and boasts in the great hall. His mother whispers poison in the darkness. And Alexander trains, studies, and dreams of a future that will either kill him or make him immortal. The world does not yet know his name, but it will. Soon, the earth itself will tremble at his approach. Segment 2. Rise of the Warrior, the Path to Glory. The turning point comes when Alexander is 16. Philip is away on campaign in Byzantium, and Alexander is left as regent in Pella. It is meant to be a ceremonial role, a chance for the boy to practice statecraft under the watchful eyes of his father's advisors. But then the Macedon, a Thracian tribe on Macedon's northern border, see an opportunity. With Philip gone, and only a boy on the throne, they launch a raid into Macedonian territory, burning villages, stealing livestock, killing anyone who resists. The advisors urge caution. Wait for Philip to return. Do not provoke a larger conflict. But Alexander ignores them. He gathers a force of cavalry and light infantry, men loyal to him personally, not to his father, and marches north. The campaign is brutal and swift. Alexander catches the Macedon by surprise, attacking at dawn when their warriors are scattered and unprepared. He does not fight from the rear like most commanders. He leads the charge himself, his horse Bucephalus crashing into the enemy line, his sword rising and falling in the pale morning light. The Macedon warriors, expecting a boy, find themselves facing a demon. Alexander fights with a fury that shocks even his own men. He is everywhere at once, cutting down warriors, rallying his cavalry, driving the enemy before him like sheep. By noon, the Macedon are broken. Their village is burned. Their chief is dead. And Alexander, covered in blood and mud, renames the site Alexandropolis, Alexander's city. He is 16 years old, and he has won his first battle as a commander. When Philip returns and learns what has happened, his reaction is complex. He is proud, but also uneasy. The boy is becoming a man, and not just any man, a rival. The tension between them grows. It explodes 2 years later at Philip's wedding to a new wife, Cleopatra Eurydice. During the feast, Cleopatra's uncle, Attalus, makes a drunken toast, praying that the new marriage will produce a legitimate heir to the Macedonian throne. The implication is clear. Alexander, whose mother is a foreigner, is not truly legitimate. Alexander, drunk himself and humiliated in front of the entire court, hurls his wine cup at Attalus and shouts, "What am I, then? A bastard?" Philip, even drunker, struggles to his feet and draws his sword, intending to attack his own son. But he is too drunk to walk straight. He stumbles and falls flat on his face in front of everyone. Alexander stands over his father, contempt dripping from every word. "Look at this man. He prepares to cross from Europe to Asia, and he cannot even cross from one couch to another." Mother and son flee that night, fearing for their lives. They take refuge in Epirus, Olympia's homeland. For months, Alexander lives in exile, wondering if his future is over before it has truly begun. But Philip needs him. The invasion of Persia, years in the planning, cannot proceed with the heir in exile. Reconciliation is brokered. Alexander returns. The wound, however, never truly heals. Then, in 336 BCE, everything changes. Philip is assassinated. During a wedding procession in the theater at Aegae, one of his own bodyguards, Pausanias, rushes forward and stabs him to death. The motive remains murky: personal revenge, political conspiracy, perhaps both. Rumors swirl that Olympias was involved. That Alexander knew. That Persian gold paid for the blade. The truth dies with the conspirators, who are hunted down and killed before they can talk. What matters is this: Philip is dead, and Alexander, at 20, is king. The vultures circle immediately. The Greek city-states, which Philip had bullied into submission, declare their independence. Thebes rebels. Athens celebrates. The barbarian tribes on Macedon's borders see opportunity. Philip's generals, older men who have served for decades, doubt whether this boy can hold the kingdom together. Alexander's first act as king is to move with shocking speed. He marches south into Greece at the head of his army and appears at the gates of Thebes before the city even knows he has left Macedon. The Thebans, terrified, submit. The Athenians, who were preparing for war, hastily send ambassadors with apologies. Alexander accepts their submission but makes it clear he is not his father. He is faster, more ruthless, and more ambitious. Within months, he has secured Greece. But securing is not enough. He must also terrify. When the city of Thebes rebels again the following year, Alexander makes an example that will echo through history. He lays siege to the city, breaches the walls, and then unleashes his army. What follows is not a battle, but a massacre. 6,000 Thebans are killed. 30,000 are sold into slavery. The city itself is razed to the ground, erased from the earth except for the house of the poet Pindar, which Alexander orders spared out of respect for Greek culture. The message is clear: submit or be annihilated. Now comes the great gamble. Alexander will do what his father planned, but never lived to accomplish: invade Persia. The Persian Empire is the greatest power the world has ever seen, stretching from Egypt to India, ruling over millions. Its armies are vast. Its wealth is beyond imagination. Most men would consider such an invasion madness. Alexander considers it destiny. In 334 BCE, Alexander crosses the Hellespont into Asia with an army of 35,000 men. His first act is to visit the ruins of Troy, where he runs naked around the tomb of Achilles, placing a wreath on it, and declaring that Achilles had been fortunate to have Homer to immortalize his deeds. It is theater, but it is also genuine. Alexander believes he is walking in the footsteps of heroes. He believes the gods are watching. The Persian response is swift. The satraps of Asia Minor gather an army and meet Alexander at the Granicus River. It is a trap. The Persians hold the high ground on the far bank, their cavalry waiting to cut down the Macedonians as they struggle across the water. Alexander's generals urge caution. Wait, find another crossing. But Alexander refuses. He plunges into the river at the head of his companion cavalry, his armor gleaming, his white-plumed helmet marking him as the target. The Persians converge on him. He is surrounded, struck on the helmet, nearly dragged from his horse. A Persian noble raises his sword to deliver the killing blow. But Clytus, one of Alexander's bodyguards, cuts the man down from behind, saving Alexander's life. The Macedonians fight their way across the river and break the Persian line. The victory is decisive. The coast of Asia Minor lies open. City after city falls. Some surrender. Others resist and are destroyed. At Gordium, Alexander encounters the famous Gordian knot, an impossibly complex knot tied by an ancient king. Legend says that whoever unties it will rule Asia. Alexander examines it for a moment, then draws his sword and cuts it in half. Whether you call it pragmatism or blasphemy depends on your perspective. But the message is clear: Alexander does not play by the old rules. Then comes the true test. King Darius III of Persia, alarmed at the loss of Asia Minor, gathers an army of perhaps 100,000 men and marches to meet the Macedonian upstart. The armies meet at Issus, a narrow coastal plain where Darius' numerical advantage is negated by the terrain. Alexander, commanding a force less than half the size of the Persian army, once again leads from the front. He charges directly at Darius, cutting through the Persian royal guard, aiming to kill the king himself. Darius, seeing this maniac in blood-spattered armor carving a path toward him, panics and flees. His army, seeing their king run, collapses into chaos. The Macedonians slaughter them by the thousands. Darius' mother, wife, and daughters are captured. Alexander treats them with unexpected courtesy, declaring that Darius is his enemy, not defenseless women. Egypt welcomes him as a liberator from Persian rule. He founds a city that will bear his name, Alexandria, destined to become one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. He travels into the desert to consult the oracle of Zeus Ammon at Siwa. What the oracle tells him remains a secret, but when Alexander emerges from the shrine, those close to him notice a change. He begins to believe, or at least to claim, that he is the son of Zeus, a god made flesh. Is it megalomania, or is it strategy, a way to legitimize his rule over conquered peoples who expect their kings to be divine? The final confrontation with Darius comes at Gaugamela in 331 BCE. Darius has assembled the largest army the world has ever seen, perhaps 200,000 men, including scythe chariots and war elephants. He has chosen a vast plain where his numbers can overwhelm the Macedonians. On paper, Alexander should be annihilated. But Alexander is no longer fighting like a mortal. He faints, probing the Persian line, drawing them out, creating a gap. Then he launches a cavalry charge directly at that gap, straight toward Darius once again. It is the same tactic as Issus, but on a far grander scale. The charge is a spear aimed at the heart of the Persian Empire. Darius, just as before, flees. His army disintegrates. The Persian Empire, which has stood for 2 centuries, shatters in a single afternoon. Alexander marches into Babylon in triumph. He takes Susa and its treasures. He burns Persepolis, the ceremonial capital, in revenge for the Persian destruction of Athens generations before. Some say it was planned. Others say it happened during a drunken revel at the urging of a courtesan. Either way, the greatest city of the Persian Empire goes up in flames, and Alexander watches it burn. He is 25 years old, and he has conquered the known world. But it is not enough. It will never be enough. Segment 3. Myths, Secrets, and Unsolved Mysteries. In the summer of 327 BCE, deep in the Hindu Kush Mountains, Alexander's army camps in the ruins of an ancient fortress. The men are exhausted, far from home, fighting in lands they cannot pronounce against enemies they do not understand. One night, around the campfires, the soldiers begin to talk. They speak of the cities they have seen, the wonders and terrors of the East. And inevitably, the talk turns to the mystery that has haunted the campaign since they left the familiar shores of the Mediterranean, the prophecy of Tyre. 2 years earlier, Alexander laid siege to the island city of Tyre, one of the greatest fortresses in the ancient world. The Tyrians, confident in their walls and their navy, mocked him from their ramparts. They said the sea god Melkart would protect them, that no mortal could breach their defenses. Alexander, in response, did the impossible. He built a causeway from the mainland to the island, half a mile long, constructed from rubble and timber under constant missile fire from the Tyrian fleet. It took 7 months, but when the causeway was complete, Alexander brought up siege towers and battering rams and broke through the walls. The slaughter that followed was terrible, thousands killed, thousands more enslaved. But it is what happened before the final assault that still haunts the army's memory. The night before the breach, Alexander claimed he had a dream. In the dream, Heracles, his ancestor, appeared to him and showed him how to take the city. But others in the camp that night reported something different. They said they heard singing, a chorus of voices in a language no one recognized, rising from the sea. They said they saw lights beneath the water, moving like a procession, circling the doomed city. When Alexander was told of this, he smiled and said the gods were abandoning Tyre, coming over to his side. But there were those who wondered, what if it was not the gods leaving Tyre, but something else? What if the old powers of the earth, older than Greek or Persian, were stirring in response to this conqueror who would not stop? Throughout the campaign, similar mysteries follow Alexander like shadows. In Egypt, he makes his pilgrimage across the desert to the oracle of Zeus Ammon at Siwa. No one knows what the oracle told him. He emerges from the shrine in a state of exaltation, but when his companions ask what was said, he only smiles and says the answer is between him and the god. Years later, on his deathbed, he will whisper that the oracle's prophecy has come true, but he will die before he can explain. What did the oracle see? What did it promise? Scholars and mystics have debated this for 2 millennia. Some claim the oracle told him he was divine, the son of Zeus. Others believe it warned him of his death and told him that he would achieve immortality through glory, but never through peace. Still others whispered darker possibilities, that the oracle was not a priest of Zeus at all, but a priestess of far older gods, gods who saw in Alexander a tool for purposes mortals could not fathom. Then there is the question of Alexander's armor. Throughout his campaigns, Alexander wears armor that is said to have belonged to Achilles himself, taken from the temple at Troy. It is a breastplate of bronze worked with silver, depicting scenes of gods and heroes, and it is said to be blessed, or cursed, by the powers that watched over the Trojan War. Alexander wears it in every major battle. Men report that they have seen arrows and spears strike the armor and simply glance away, as if deflected by invisible hands. Alexander himself is wounded many times, in the thigh at the Granicus, in the shoulder at Gaza, most seriously in the chest during the siege of the Mali city in India, but never while wearing the Achilles breastplate. Is it simply well-made armor, Or is there something more? When Alexander dies in Babylon, the armor disappears. For decades afterward, treasure hunters and relic seekers scour the empire looking for it. Some claim it was buried with him in his tomb. Others say it was stolen by priests and hidden away, too dangerous to remain in mortal hands. To this day, no one knows where it is. There is also the matter of the prophecies and omens that seem to cluster around Alexander. Before crossing into Asia, he cuts the Gordian knot, and that night there is a tremendous thunderstorm, which the seers interpret as Zeus' approval. Before the Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander's priests sacrificed to the gods and read the omens in the entrails of the animals. They report that the signs are favorable, but later, some admit that the signs were actually dreadful, predicting disaster, and that they lied to keep the army's morale high. Yet Alexander won anyway. Was it luck, genius, or something else guiding his path? In the Persian capital of Persepolis, Alexander enters the treasury and finds something that troubles him deeply, though he tells no one at the time. Among the gold and jewels looted from across the empire, there is a small stone tablet covered in cuneiform script. Alexander has it translated, and the translation describes an ancient prophecy from the time of Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire. The prophecy speaks of a conqueror who will come from the west, a man born under strange stars, who will burn the seat of kings and carry the fire to the edge of the world. But the prophecy does not end with conquest. It warns that the conqueror will be consumed by his own ambition, that he will die young, and that his empire will fragment and fall. Alexander orders the tablet destroyed, but copies have been made, and the prophecy spreads in whispers through the army. The men begin to wonder, is Alexander fulfilling destiny, or is he trapped by it? In India, the army encounters holy men, ascetics who sit naked under the sun and claim to see beyond the veil of the material world. One of these men, whom the Greeks call Kalanos, joins Alexander's retinue. He speaks in riddles and metaphors, but there are moments when his words cut like knives. Once, when Alexander asks him the secret of ruling justly, Kalanos picks up a dried, shriveled piece of leather and lays it on the ground. He steps on one edge, and the opposite edge curls up. He steps on another spot, and a different part rises. He says, "This is empire. When you press down on one part, another rises in rebellion. True peace is impossible. The only choice is where you place your foot, and for how long." Alexander laughs, but there is no humor in it. The soldiers also speak of a darker legend, one that grows in the retelling. They say that in the mountains of Afghanistan, Alexander's army stumbled upon a ruined temple, ancient beyond measure, carved from black stone. Inside, there was a statue of a god the Greeks did not recognize, not Zeus, not Mithras, not any deity of the known world. The statue's eyes were made of some dark gemstone that seemed to watch you wherever you stood. Alexander ordered the temple explored, and his men found a chamber deep underground. In that chamber was a throne, and on the throne sat the mummified remains of a king, dressed in armor so old that it crumbled at a touch. Around the king's neck was an amulet inscribed with a warning in a script no one could read. Alexander took the amulet and wore it for 3 days. On the third night, he woke screaming, covered in sweat, and tore the amulet from his neck. He ordered it sealed in a lead box and buried. He never spoke of what he had seen, but those who were with him in his tent that night said he looked like a man who had glimpsed his own tomb. Are these stories true? It is impossible to know. The line between history and legend blurs in the presence of someone like Alexander. What we do know is that the ancient world believed in powers beyond the visible, in gods and spirits and fates woven before birth. And we know that Alexander, for all his rationality and Greek education, was a product of that world. He sacrificed to the gods before every battle. He consulted omens. He believed, or at least claimed to believe, that he was descended from Heracles and Achilles, that he was chosen by Zeus. Whether these beliefs were genuine or merely political theater, they shaped his actions and the actions of those around him. There is one final mystery, perhaps the deepest of all. What was Alexander searching for? Conquest alone does not explain his relentless drive eastward, pushing his army beyond Persia, beyond Afghanistan, into the mountains and jungles of India. He spoke of reaching the ends of the earth, of seeing the great ocean that the Greeks believed encircled the world. But there is a sense, in the writings of those who knew him, that he was looking for something more, some proof of his destiny, some final confirmation that he was not merely a conqueror, but something greater. He wanted to surpass Heracles, to surpass Dionysus, to become a legend that would outlive empires. And perhaps, in his darkest moments, he wanted to find something that would finally satisfy the hunger in his soul, the hunger that drove him from one victory to the next without rest or peace. He never found it. And perhaps, in the end, that is the greatest mystery of all. Segment 4. Power, Glory, and the World They Left Behind. By 323 BCE, Alexander sits in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, master of an empire larger than any in history, and he is dying. The irony is bitter. He has survived battles against impossible odds, crossed deserts and mountains that killed lesser men, taken wounds that would have killed a dozen soldiers. But now, at 32, he is being killed by something he cannot fight: fever, illness, possibly poison. The exact cause will be debated for centuries, but the result is the same. The conqueror who seemed invincible lies on his couch, struggling to breathe, watching his life drain away. Around him, the empire is already beginning to fracture. His generals, Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antigonus, Perdiccas, hover like vultures, each wondering what will happen when the king dies. Alexander has no clear successor. His half-brother Philip is mentally disabled. His wife Roxana is pregnant, but the child is not yet born. When the generals finally ask Alexander to whom he leaves his empire, he reportedly whispers, "To the strongest." It is a curse disguised as an answer, a guarantee that his empire will be torn apart by civil war. But to understand the world Alexander leaves behind, we must step back from the deathbed and look at the broader picture, at the society and culture that existed in the long shadow of his conquests. In Macedon, far from the splendor of Babylon, the old ways persist. The Macedonian nobility, those who survived the campaigns, have returned impossibly wealthy, laden with Persian gold and Eastern slaves. But wealth has not made them soft. They are still warriors first, still drinking and brawling and fighting duels over matters of honor. Yet something has changed. The younger generation, boys who grew up hearing stories of Alexander, no longer see Macedon as the center of the world. They look east, toward the glittering cities of Persia and Egypt, toward opportunities for glory and riches. The old nobility, Philip's generation, grumble that the young have been corrupted by Persian luxury, but the young reply that the old are simply jealous that they were not part of the great adventure. In Greece, the response to Alexander is more complex. On one hand, he is a conqueror who has subdued the city-states and ended their independence. On the other, he has fulfilled the old dream of Greek supremacy over the barbarian East. The Athenian orators denounce him as a tyrant, but even they cannot deny that he has spread Greek culture from the Mediterranean to the industry. Philosophers debate what Alexander represents. Is he the ideal ruler envisioned by Plato, the philosopher king who brings order to chaos? Or is he a tyrant, proof that absolute power corrupts absolutely? The debates continue in the academies and symposia, but they are largely theoretical. The age of the free city-state is over. The future belongs to kingdoms and empires. In Persia, the transformation is profound. For 2 centuries, the Persian Empire had been the greatest power on earth, ruling with a combination of tolerance and iron-fisted control. The Persian nobility had been the aristocracy of the world, living in unimaginable luxury, their courts filled with gold and silk and the tribute of 100 nations. Now, that world is gone. The Persian nobility who survived Alexander's conquest face a choice: adapt or perish. Some choose to collaborate, accepting positions in Alexander's administration, marrying their daughters to Macedonian officers, learning Greek and adopting Hellenic customs. Others retreat into sullen resentment, preserving Persian culture in private while outwardly submitting to the new order. Still others resist, launching guerrilla campaigns in the mountains and deserts, which Alexander's successors will spend decades suppressing. Alexander himself tried to bridge the gap between Greek and Persian. At Susa, he held a mass wedding, marrying himself to 2 Persian princesses and compelling 10,000 of his Macedonian soldiers to marry Persian women. He adopted Persian dress and customs, incorporated Persian soldiers into his army, and promoted capable Persians to positions of authority. His goal was to create a hybrid culture, a fusion of Greek and Persian that would unite his empire. His Macedonian veterans hated it. They saw it as betrayal, as abandoning their identity for the sake of Eastern decadence. At Opis, when Alexander announced that he was sending the veterans home and would rely on Persian soldiers instead, the Macedonians mutinied. It took all of Alexander's charisma and authority to bring them back into line, but the episode revealed the deep fault lines in his empire. The cities Alexander founded, and he founded dozens, scattered across the conquered territories, most named Alexandria, became the seeds of a new civilization. These were not just military outposts, but genuine cities, populated with Greek colonists, veterans, merchants, and craftsmen. They brought with them Greek law, Greek architecture, Greek theater, and philosophy. But they did not exist in a vacuum. They were surrounded by local populations, Persians, Egyptians, Bactrians, Indians, who had their own ancient cultures. What emerged over time was something new, a hybrid culture that historians call Hellenistic, combining Greek and Eastern elements. This culture would dominate the Mediterranean and Near East for 300 years, until the rise of Rome. The contrast between the life of a soldier and the life of the elite in this new world is stark. For a common Macedonian soldier, Alexander's campaigns meant years of brutal marching, savage fighting, and constant fear. Thousands died of wounds, disease, and exhaustion. Those who survived returned home to find their villages barely changed, their families poorer, their sacrifices largely forgotten except in songs and stories. But for the officers, for the generals, and the nobles who received governorships and satrapies, the campaigns meant unimaginable wealth and power. Ptolemy became king of Egypt, founding a dynasty that would last 3 centuries and end with Cleopatra. Seleucus carved out an empire stretching from Syria to India. These men lived in palaces that would have made the old Macedonian nobility weep with envy, ruling over populations of millions, surrounded by luxury that even Persian kings might have envied. In Alexandria, the city Alexander founded in Egypt and the most successful of all his foundations, a new kind of society emerges. It is a cosmopolitan city, home to Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, Persians, and people from a dozen other cultures. Its famed library, founded by Ptolemy, becomes the greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world, housing hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Scholars come from across the known world to study there. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, all advance by leaps and bounds in this hothouse of intellectual ferment. But Alexandria is also a city of stark contrasts. The royal palace and the library sit near the harbor, glittering in the sun, while in the back streets, poverty and squalor persist. The Hellenistic world is not egalitarian. It is a world of sharp divisions between the rulers and the ruled, between Greek-speaking elites and the native populations who work the land and pay the taxes. In the courts of Alexander's successors, elaborate rituals and ceremonies develop to legitimize their rule. These kings are not born to the throne as Alexander was. They are generals who seized power through force and cunning, and they must constantly justify their rule. They adopt Persian court rituals, prostration, elaborate titles, the presentation of the king as a divine or semi-divine figure. They commission histories and poems celebrating their deeds, comparing them to Alexander, to Heracles, to the gods themselves. They build monuments and temples, mint coins with their faces, and stage elaborate festivals to display their wealth and power. It is propaganda, but it is also something more, an attempt to create a new kind of monarchy, one that blends Greek and Eastern traditions into something that can hold together a diverse, multicultural empire. But the empire does not hold. Within years of Alexander's death, his generals are at war with each other, carving up his conquests into separate kingdoms. The wars of the Diadochi, the successors, will rage for decades, costing hundreds of thousands of lives. The dream of a unified empire dies with Alexander. What replaces it is a world of competing kingdoms, all claiming to be Alexander's true heirs, all fighting to preserve or expand their shares of his legacy. Yet, even in fragmentation, Alexander's legacy endures. For over 2,000 years, Generals and conquerors will study his tactics, trying to replicate his genius. Julius Caesar will weep in front of a statue of Alexander, lamenting that he has achieved so little at the same age. Napoleon will carry a copy of Arrian's History of Alexander on his campaigns. Military academies around the world still teach the battles of Granicus, Issus, and Gaugamela as masterpieces of strategy and audacity. But the legacy is not only military. Alexander broke open the walls between East and West, creating connections and exchanges that would reshape both. Greek philosophy spreads eastward, Eastern religions and ideas flow westward. The Hellenistic world that emerges from his conquests is a world of unprecedented cultural exchange, a world where a Greek merchant can trade in India, where a Babylonian astronomer can debate with an Egyptian priest, where ideas can travel from one end of the known world to the other. And in the end, the question remains, what did Alexander achieve? He conquered an empire that crumbled within a generation. He spread Greek culture, but at the cost of the destruction of ancient civilizations. He brought glory to himself and his companions, but endless suffering to those who stood in his way. Millions lived and died because of his ambitions. Entire cities rose and fell at his command. Was he a hero or a monster? A genius or a madman? Perhaps he was all of these things. Perhaps that is the nature of greatness, that it contains within itself both creation and destruction, both glory and horror. What we do know is that Alexander changed the world. The world before him and the world after him are fundamentally different. He proved that nothing is impossible for those with enough courage and enough ruthlessness to seize it. He showed that one man, through will and genius and unrelenting ambition, can alter the course of history. And he showed that even a man who conquers the world can never conquer himself. As Alexander lay dying in Babylon, his companions asked if he had any final commands. He had conquered 3 continents, defeated armies 100 times, founded cities that would stand for millennia. He had achieved more in 13 years than most kingdoms achieve in centuries. But now, at the end, when asked for his final wisdom, all he could say was, "I foresee a great funeral contest over me." He was right. The contest over his legacy continues to this day. And in that contest, in the endless debate over who he was and what he achieved, Alexander found the immortality he always craved. Not peace, not satisfaction, but immortality. The boy who stood in the shadows watching his father's soldiers has become the legend who will never die. And the world, for better or worse, will never forget his name.